Hello, Haunted Heart Society viewers, and welcome back to another episode of The Strange, the Obscure, and the Unusual. I'm going to try something a little different today. Instead of just reacting to a silent film, instead I will be comparing a piece of media that most people don't care about to another piece of media that most people have never heard of, as in this series we will be dragging books and movies back from the crypt of time and performing acts of media necromancy. For our first ritual, I will be taking a look at a novel published in 1917, two subsequent film adaptations, and all of these are entitled The Unholy Three. The first film is a silent film which was released in 1925, directed by Tod Browning and starring Lon Chaney, both of whom we've watched before on this channel. Tod Browning's most important contribution to pop culture is as the director of the 1931 Universal film version of Dracula. His second most notable work would be the 1932 film Freaks. You may also notice Browning's name on a number of circus-themed films from this era, which would make sense as in real life he ran away at the age of 16 to join a circus before getting into film acting at the age of 29. Tod Browning and Lon Chaney also did a number of movies together. Lon Chaney is also in a surprising amount of films where he plays either carnival performers or clowns, specifically. We watched He Who Gets Slapped earlier this year, Emily and I, and Lon Chaney played the clown in that one. That was not a Tod Browning film, however. But the Tod of the hour, for our purposes, is actually author Tod Robbins. Robbins's story, Spurs, was the bassist for Freaks, and this had been introduced to Browning by Unholy Three star Harry Earls, who also starred in Freaks and can also be seen in The Wizard of Oz. So, Robbins is the author of The Unholy Three, which was, again, published in 1917. The second film adaptation is a 1930 talkie remake, and this is the only film in which you can hear Lon Chaney's voice. Films from 1930 will be entering the public domain in the US in 2026. I know other countries have some different copyright laws, so it's not necessarily a worldwide thing. Fun fact, our Hexen videos can't be watched in Sweden. Now that I have voraciously devoured all three aforementioned works, which is a lie because I was scrolling for artwork to add to my lock screen, after I realized that the talkie remake was nearly an exact replica of the silent film, including some of the same actors in the same roles, which is very interesting because that is not directed by Tod Browning. But otherwise, it's the same thing, but they talk in it. We will start off on all counts on a hot day, meeting our performers in a sideshow tent. For example, we have the Illustrated Woman, Conjoined Twins, the Strong Man, and the first major deviation from the novel. In the novel, we actually start off from the point of view of Tweedledee, who is a man with dwarfism who was played by Harry Earls in both versions of the films. His role as the ringleader of everything that's to follow in this story is handed over to Chaney's character in the films, which of course is because Lon Chaney is the lead actor, he's the star. But in doing so, we've already lost an important point. Tweedledee is a very angry, vindictive man, a result not necessarily because of his physical condition, but the way he's treated because of it. Okay, so this is from the novel, and this is page 8, which I have a digital copy of here. All that he asked, all that he had ever asked, was to be taken seriously, and yet no one had granted him this simple wish. Most had laughed, some had pitied, but none had understood. None had looked upon him as a human being like themselves. No, he had been a doll, a plaything for all those vulgar children of the world, children who paid to see him move his head, open his mouth, and speak, children quite careless of the inner workings of their doll, children of the materialistic world. And as he had grown older, the inner workings of this doll had changed. Strange transformations had taken place. The springs of good had corroded with rust, and soon the green mold of evil covered everything. Yes, I know. At first, his heroics had been of a childlike character. He wished to be considered good, noble, brave. He ached to be a hero. He acquired a stately carriage, only to see the people before his platform convulsed with merriment. He soon learned that this was an impossible role to play. Whatever he did was humorous. When he gave to poverty, poverty laughed in his face. Can you move, please? All professions, except that of a clown, were closed to him. His intelligence and ambition is constantly thwarted. And sure, he does desire praise and admiration, but he wanted it to be for good traits, for being heroic, and instead, no matter what he does, he's laughed at and infantilized. He also states, and this is very important because this is going to set us up for the rest of the characters. He wishes for a, quote, commanding body and commanding voice, and this is how we're introduced to the other members of the trio, Hercules and Echo. Hercules is a pretty standard strong man across all versions. There's a very humorous part in the film where a lady is telling a child not to smoke, and then he'll grow up to be strong like Hercules, and then they leave and Hercules lights a cigarette. Echo's character is changed drastically. Echo, in all versions, is a ventriloquist. In the films, he is played by Lon Chaney. And in the films, he is the one who comes up with the plans and the crimes. Whereas in the novel, Echo is described as beautiful and girlish. He carries a demon puppet on his shoulder that has the head of a man and the body of a goat, which he tells Tweedledee has stolen his brain. He's obedient to Tweedledee and even shows evidence of being afraid of him at times, so you can already see how this character is not exactly leading man material in the year of 1925. Film Echo is even given a girlfriend, a pickpocket, named Rosie. But while Film Echo is already engaged in petty crime, novel Tweedledee is complete with the body, that is Hercules, and the voice, which is Echo, while he can be the mind, pulling the strings and directing the other two. After being heckled by the audience and kicking a kid right in the face, and starting a brawl, which happens in every version, they are forced to leave the circus, and Tweedledee begins to formulate his plans for revenge on the world and a life of villainy and crime. Well, in the novel, this means starting right off with a murder where they leave the body of another circus member in place of a dummy in a shop window display. The films are going to omit this scene entirely. I imagine because it's quite a shocking turn of events. And it also spares us the disparaging commentary about the Jewish store owner, who is more concerned about the ruined merchandise than the literal corpse in the window. We will continue not following the novel at all, but in all versions we will be introduced to Hector, who in the films is an employee at O'Grady's bird shop. Robbins' Hector MacDonald is a struggling writer who refuses to give up his craft even after his wealthy uncle cuts him off. He's sort of involved with Dorothy Arlington, who hails from a rich family, but her father is not impressed by him at all. In order to try and win the good graces of the Arlington family, Hector decides to try and grant the wish of Dorothy's young nephew, which is for a parrot. He's introduced to the Unholy Three then in the parrot shop, where Echo is posing as the sweet old lady selling the birds, Tweedledee as her baby nephew, and Hercules as a cousin. We get an astonishing scene in which Hector gets a full demonstration of a pirate, a philosopher, parrot, and even a talking raven, all who are, of course, just Echo's ventriloquism skills. But Hector is impressed enough anyway to buy a parrot and have it sent to the Arlingtons. You may be wondering at this point how we go from murder to parrots in the same way the novel's narrative point of view has gone from carnies to failed writers. But while Hector is making friends with whom he believes to be a nice elderly lady, the parrots are actually a front to enter the houses of the wealthy. Of course, these birds do not actually talk. So Echo, as his grandma character, is called into these homes to check on the birds, try to get them to talk, and to see what's wrong. In the novel, Tweedledee tries another tactic, which is to pose as an abandoned baby on the doorstep of the Arlingtons. They take him in, and it's pretty late at night, so they put him in the same room as the little nephew, whose name is Tommy, which is the boy that Hector had bought the pirate parrot for. I think this is probably the best scene which shows the juxtaposition that we see in the novel, which again was removed mostly from the film. So you have Tweedledee, who is not a child, but treated like one, and actual children. Tweedledee is mean, vindictive, violent. He has no problems inflicting violence on children. And during the night, he strangles Tommy, who is nearly dead when he's discovered in the morning. Fortunately, Tommy lives, but that can't be said for some of the other of the Unholy Three's parrot scam victims. Though the Arlingtons are mentioned in the film, Echo mentions to Rosie that they're set to go pull something off at their house. The Arlingtons had purchased one of the parrots, called the shop because the parrot doesn't talk. They went over to see what was wrong, and then we get a scene where Mr. Arlington is just admiring his rubies. And then actually hands them to Tweedledee, who's pretending to be a baby, and they kind of have to rustle the beads away from him. But Rosie, you may have noticed, has not been mentioned in the book. And in fact, she's taken the place of Dorothy, who is solely Hector's love interest. Meanwhile, the Arlingtons have been combined with Hector's wealthy uncle. And again, it is Mr. Arlington who next winds up dead in the film and his rubies stolen, instead of Hector's uncle, who is the victim in the book. Film Echo is also very angry when Tweedledee and Hercules pull off the robbery on their own and end up committing the murder. We've already seen that the novel trio are no strangers to murder, and even before Hector's uncle Tobias, there was the display window incident, and also another parrot customer that we had a bit of a news story snippet about. Making Echo assertively opposed to killing is a big difference from his original incarnation, which is passive, obedient, and, as he believes, brainless. He's almost Tweedledee's kind of servant. We can probably guess that this higher sense of morality attached to the main hero is setting us on the track to allow him to be redeemed in the end, while the murderers are not, which creates a much clearer black and white reason for this to be the case. Novel Echo does have an outburst, but for a very different... Oh, can you get off? For a very different reason, which I will again read to you. "You have lied to me always, Tweedledee." It was Mrs. Blake who spoke. Obviously, Mrs. Blake is Echo's disguised character. She was seated in her accustomed place beside the window. Her knitting lay neglected in her lap. Her large, luminous eyes wandered about the room. She seemed trying to avoid the sharp, penetrating glance of her nephew. Little Willie, which is Tweedledee, sat up very straight in his wicker baby carriage, his black beady eyes narrowed into two evil slits, his plump hands clenched into tiny fists. "So I have lied to you, Echo," piped the child. "Hear our Echo, Hercules." Cousin Harry, which is in quotes in here because obviously that's Hercules, who was kneeling before a box of carpenter's tools, lifted his eyes to the child's face. "He has dared to tell my master that he lies," he muttered. Mrs. Blake leaped to her feet with surprising agility. Her long face began to work convulsively. Her eyes rolled up till they seemed to be white and sightless. "Yes, Tweedledee," she cried, "you have lied to me. Always you have lied. Once you told me that we would go out into the world as to a dance, that we would take adventure by the hand, and that I would be free, free like the wind. But has it come to pass? Ah, no. I am forced to sit here day after day, an old woman, knitting. I did not leave the circus for this. There I had more liberty. There I had the kind wooden demon who told me what to do." Cousin Harry rose to his full height. "Echo," he said menacingly, "do not speak so to Tweedledee." But Mrs. Blake continued unheedingly. "Yes, you have lied to me. You have taken advantage of poor Echo, who has never wished you any harm. At night you have shown him drops of blood. Before the morning they have crystallized into precious stones. Blood is precious. Precious! That is why nature hides it so carefully beneath our skins. Each drop will turn into a garnet or a ruby if it is rich enough. When Hector MacDonald's uncle left this morning, you whispered in my ear, 'That man has rarest rubies flowing through his veins.' How could you know that, Tweedledee?" The child frowned impatiently. "Be silent, Echo." "No, I will not be silent. I am the voice, and I shall speak. You have stolen my kind little wooden demon, and you will not give him back to me. Without him I cannot understand you, Tweedledee. Why did you ask me to find out what size shoes MacDonald wears? I am afraid for him, Tweedledee. I would not have you take a single drop of his blood. No, not if it turned into the most sparkling ruby in our treasure chest. Why is Hercules making stilts? Ah, you will not answer me. I smell blood. It is coming in a torrent of precious stones. I am tired of precious stones. They are cold and sharp. They weigh me down beneath their wicked weight, like a bag full of crimson pebbles. They no longer sparkle in the sunshine of a happy thought. They glow as sullen and red as the dying sunset. Because of them, I will no longer obey you, Tweedledee. Yeah, so very, different motivations that we see here for this outburst. Because they had been in the Arlington house and had seen the rubies while checking in on the parrot, a combination of the Tobias murder and another crime mentioned in the novel, the film directly implicates them in their disguises as having knowledge about the crime. And we find out that poor Hector was the one who had delivered the bird in the first place. In order to frame him, Tweedledee plants the rubies in his room. In the novel, you saw them trying to get his shoe size and plant things at the scene that would point to it being Hector. But also the natural first suspect is the disowned and broke nephew. Either way, Hector ends up in prison, and his book version decides to do something absolutely unhinged, which is to lean into the idea of being a murderer in order to sell his writing. I'm going to read another passage to you because what he decides to do is just so not smart. But here he is in prison. Ready? 2 weeks after the events recorded in the previous chapter, MacDonald sat alone. We'll start with this. MacDonald sat alone in his cell, writing busily at a small ink-stained table. His sojourn in the Tombs had changed his appearance for the better. He seemed to have thrived on prison fare. His hollow cheeks had filled out, the dark rings about his eyes had disappeared, and his entire person pulsed with new life. But perhaps the greatest change of all was in the young man's dress. Gone were the ragged coat and baggy trousers, the soiled collar and worn shoes, and in their place one beheld the fashionable raiment of that other MacDonald, that MacDonald who had once been the pride of his tailor's heart. And what had caused this sudden transformation? What had made this withered bud open to the renewal of beautiful, joyous youth? Money had accomplished this miracle. Money, which Hector, I did it again. That's the second time I've said that. Money, which Hector had always despised, waving her golden hand, had cried out, "Presto! Change!" and the impossible had become a reality. MacDonald, in these 2 weeks, had grown to be a celebrity. And where did this money come from? Ah, that was the beauty of it. He had pried it out of the fists of the magazine monarchs as long ago he had foretold, and had given them for it his rejected work at a price. Yes, now they came for his stories, and it was pay in advance, with Hector during these days. He told them, chuckling inwardly, that perhaps in a month or so he might go to the electric chair, and then what good could money do him? He must have it now or not at all. And so they had paid, grudgingly perhaps, but still they had paid him just the price he asked. And why should they not? His name was ringing through the world. Every newspaper column had articles about him. His picture was examined daily by millions of curious eyes. He read about himself, enjoying it all with the zest of a child. They called him in the newspapers the cold-blooded young murderer. They dwelt on his personal appearance. They hinted that he was a follower in the philosophic path of Nietzsche, that he believed he was only securing his rights by murdering his uncle, as the weak should always be crushed by the strong. They designated him the mad young genius who murdered people so that he might describe more vividly, by his fertile pen, the actual sensations in the brain of the murderer. They alluded to his strange silence when he had been examined, prophesying that he would confess everything at his trial, and MacDonald laughed at this to himself and encouraged them. This is the true crime phenomenon, but in the 1910s. Eventually, though, Hector's friend, who is a lawyer, shows up, and Hector tries to tell him about the bird store, which is sure to have witnesses in his favor to attest to his having been there, and not at his uncle's place. But would you know, the Unholy Three have fled. This is, in the novel, the last time we'll see Tweedledee and Hercules until their fate at the end, as they go into hiding while Hector faces his doom in the jail cell. But the film version shows us their hideout, where they have this ape for circus-related reasons that the novel did not have at all. And this ape will be the end for Tweedledee and Hercules. The 1930 film does do a better job of foreshadowing this scene by having the ape introduced closer to the beginning. And Echo also makes a comment that it'll be the death of Hercules because he keeps throwing things at it and tormenting it. Of course, we have to have Lon Chaney's character involved in a weird love triangle because Rosie's been having this thing going on with Hector, and she's also previously had this thing going on with Echo. But she's gonna be the one who asks Echo to help Hector. Lon Chaney, for some reason, is in a number of films with very awkward and sometimes completely inappropriate love triangles. And I think every film with him so far that we've watched has had this. The worst one so far has been Clown Laugh, where he fell in love with a girl who he'd rescued and raised from a toddler, and for all intents and purposes, he was her father, and it was weird and gross. And anyway, film Tweedledee and Hercules do each other in. So Hercules first kills Tweedledee, and then the ape kills Hercules. Because Echo has a change of heart. And in the film, while Echo goes to the courtroom and he stands up and he makes a full confession, on the novel's theme of doing things that are just completely unhinged, Echo sends an anonymous note to Hector and his lawyer friend. And he tells the friend to go and stand on the witness stand and recite a prayer. I think it was the Lord's Prayer specifically. Not that I can't just look in the book, that's... The important thing is that it's prayer. While Echo, who is there, uses his ventriloquism skills to give a full account of everything that happened, but it's as if it's the voice of God. Because of this divine intervention, though, the police go to where they were told Tweedledee and Hercules had been hiding. Those two are arrested and eventually executed. Echo is finally free to wander about the world with his little wooden demon. And he tries to reach for the moon on the surface, on the reflection of a lake. And then when Hector and Dorothy finally are able to be together in the end, they're walking along the shores of this lake talking about how they hope Echo was able to escape and, live his life, and they find his wooden demon washed up on the shores. And that is how it ends. In the film, of course, actually this is rare. This is a rare occurrence for going by the precedent of Lon Chaney films that we've seen so far. Film Echo has a happier ending, by which I mean he's still alive, and he goes back to the circus, but it is kind of still bittersweet as he lets go of Rosie and tells her she's free to be with Hector. And that's the end of the movie. Lon Chaney making it out of this film alive, while in the last couple had him meeting his demise at the end, is kind of ironic in this case because the character he portrays did not survive the end of the book, though he had found freedom. I think that the novel version is more sympathetic, as he's a victim of Tweedledee, who scares and intimidates him, which is for good reason because Hercules is completely unquestionably obedient to Tweedledee and has no qualms about killing people. Meanwhile, Film Echo is more assertive, and though he has this sense of morality that the other two do not, such as his refusal to stoop to murder, he's still the leader of the group and ultimately the mastermind of the crimes. So, this has been the first installment of my book to silent film, comparing one old thing to another old thing. Which version do you think was better? Do you think that the book or either movie, because they're extremely, extremely similar, which fate do you think was the better ending for the characters, especially Echo, because that character was changed so much? Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you'd like to see more of this kind of thing, don't forget to like and subscribe and all those fun things. And I will be back another time with something else. Bye!